Yes, last, I guess a few days ago, all right guys, shh. So a few days ago we talked about plants, and we had gone over the anatomy of the flower, the different parts, talked about male, female parts of the flower. So today we're going to start to talk a little bit more about how pollen is transferred from one plant to the other, what happens after that, how our seeds disperse, some of the details about after pollination. So there are different types of plants are pollinated in different ways. And there's some categories. So there are some plants in which wind pollinates them. So the pollen from the stamens of the male flowers, okay, is blown through the air, just happens to randomly land on the stigma of some female flowers, and then it's been pollinated. Okay. So there are some characteristics, some adaptations that you find in wind-pollinated flowers, and they sort of make sense. So generally in wind-pollinated flowers, the petals are small. Why do you think that's a helpful adaptation to wind pollination? Colin?
To prevent the pollen from going on the petals instead of the anther.
Okay, yeah.
No, stigma.
Yeah, so the anthers aren't like hidden in a little windscreen, right? If they're very small petals, then the wind can easily blow across the stamens for that pollen. Usually the pollen is very tiny. It's very light. Why would that be a helpful adaptation? Abby?
So the wind can carry it.
So the wind can carry it farther. Usually there's a lot of pollen produced. Why is that important? Produce lots of actual pollen grains.
If the wind can like blow it away, like away from the stigma, there would be more.
Okay. What else, Tyler?
The wind's always blowing, so it would need like more.
Not so much that you would need more Edis.
Because it's more random, it's more pollen.
Yeah, because it's just kind of random, right? The wind's blowing this pollen, it's just going everywhere. So you need a lot of it to increase the likelihood that some of it will land on the female flowers. Now, if you ever know in the springtime or even in the fall, depending, if you come out on your driveway, it's all greenish or yellow or it's all over the car, those are wind-pollinated. That's pollen from wind-pollinated species. There's so much of it, it covers your whole driveway. It covers the cars. And that's because, again, it's random. It just blows through the air, so you need a lot of it. Because a lot of it's just going to land on the grass in the driveway. You need a lot to find those female flowers. All right. The other factors, usually the anthers are exposed and kind of poking out so that the wind can hit them. And the stigma often have like little things to catch the pollen as it's blowing by. You see this feathery sort of stigma. Another way that pollen is often transferred from one flower to another is through the help of animals. Oh, here's an example. This is a pine tree, and you can see the pollen coming off of those stamens. So animals are another really important pollinator, and lots of different types of animals help pollinate plants. Do they do it just to be nice? Why would animals do this? What's the adaptation for the animal to spread pollen from one flower to another? Ella? Yeah, because plants often have a little reward for the animal that's visiting those flowers. And that reward is in the form of nectar, usually, or some nutritional product that the animal is going to use for nutrition, and in the process, helps pollinate the flowers. Colin?
Are there plants that have only male reproductive structures and only female?
Yeah.
Like, can you do an example?
A lot of the ones I know of are trees.
Trees?
Yeah. That like a whole tree is only male flowers and another whole tree is all female flowers. They're called monoecious plants.
That's
All right, so some examples. Probably, and not probably, the most common pollinator of flowers are insects, okay? Especially bees. Another common pollinator are birds. Hummingbirds are a good example. But some mammals are also pollinators of certain types of flowers. Here you see some examples of that.
Is that a strawberry?
No, that's a flower.
No, it's a strawberry.
So this gets to what I was just talking about. Animals get rewarded with nectar. Nectar is a sugary liquid. It's usually a good source of food. And depending on the type of animal that the plant is attempting to attract, the contents of the nectar usually match the nutritional requirements of that type of animal. Okay? So bird-pollinated flowers and bee-pollinated flowers have different concentrations of sugar. Here you see some examples. So if you look at this bee,
He is swimming.
it's covered in pollen. Okay, after visiting a flower, pollen gets on the animal, and then as that animal goes and visits another flower, some of that pollen falls off and is spread from flower to flower through that animal. There you see a bat covered in pollen.
Jerry Seinfeld.
All right, so often flowers have certain adaptations to sort of attract pollinators to them. The more attractive a flower is to a pollinator, the more likely it will be pollinated, the more likely it will be to pass its genes on to the next generation. So these things have evolved through natural selection. So one thing are colors. Different types of animals can perceive colors differently. And flowers have specific colors that have evolved to sort of suit their pollinator senses. So bees can see better in the blue and yellow and ultraviolet parts of the spectrum. So flowers that attract bee pollinators have those colors prominently displayed. Birds can see red very easily. So bird-pollinated flowers often are red. Does anyone have a hummingbird feeder at home?
No, but I see them all the
Yeah,
time.
and what you'll see is usually they're red, right? Sometimes they have a little yellow flower, and then in the middle is where the hummingbird can get the nectar.
Oh, they
Bats
smell?
usually don't see very well at all. Bats are often active at night. And so often the flowers that bats are attracted to are actually white to make it easier for them to find even when they have poor vision. Some flowers have special, what are called nectar guides. They're designs on a flower that often we can't even see. But bees can see in the ultraviolet spectrum, so they can see that. Here's an example, this yellow dandelion-looking flower. If we were able to see the ultraviolet markings, it actually has sort of a bullseye kind of pattern on it, but we can't actually see that.
The target,
Smells and aromas are often attractive to different types of species. And sometimes they smell good. You might think of a rose or something like that. Some smell really bad. There are some flowers that mimic the smell of rotting flesh or feces, and those are often to attract maybe flies or scavengers that often might feed on decaying flesh or organic matter. So let's talk about bees. Bees are very, very important. Bee pollinated flowers often have these nectar guides, like I just said, and bees actually feed on the nectar. They find it, they consume it, they have actual special stomachs for storing nectar. They bring it back to their hive, and what do?
Spit it.
They digest it partially, then they spit it up into another bee's mouth, which then swallows it, digests it further. This process is repeated time after time until those sugar molecules have been digested fully, then it's stored away. They evaporate some of the water, and then it's honey. So that when you have some honey on your toast or your tea, what you're really eating is multiple regurgitated bee stomach honey.
Why do multiple bees have to digest it?
Because each one sort of does a little bit of the process. Okay, so rather than one, because the bee after it regurgitates to another bee, it'll go back to a flower and get some more and bring it back. So it's sort of a process to make it happen more efficiently. So they have special stomachs that they use for this, and we'll watch a video here in a minute. And then it's stored in a honeycomb sealed up with wax, and some people can then collect it and sell it to us. Now, bee pollination is hugely important. So people can keep bees, right? And you could have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hives. You probably have seen them if you're driving out in the country. If you look out in sort of the fields and you see it looks like somebody put a dresser with drawers out in the middle of a field. And they say, what the heck's that? They're actually, those are beehives. The drawers come out. That's where the honeycomb is stored. The person keeping the bees can take them out, extract the honey, put them back in. And so people keep bees like that, sometimes for producing honey. But some people also provide bees to farms and orchards. So many of the foods that we eat, especially fruits and nuts, so the fruit, an apple, say, won't form unless the flower it originated from was pollinated. Okay? And so it's bees that pollinate those apple flowers. And so there are people that have hundreds and hundreds of beehives. They put them on big tractor trailers. They can drive them to an orchard, unload them, leave them there for a couple weeks. As they leave them there, their bees will go and visit all the various flowers in that orchard, pollinating them so that then they develop into apples. The beekeeper can load them back up on a truck, take them to a different farm, and they actually, people pay to rent out for someone to bring bees to their farm, to their orchard for a little while.
Is the reason why certain flowers smell different, like we're talking about how roses typically smell good, is that because of the nectar inside them, or just because
No, they produce others, not so much the nectar, but other chemicals they produce to attract the insect there, and then the nectar is sort of a separate attractive force.
That's the little treat on top. That's a cherry.
All right, so let's watch this little video here. This is about honey. It sort of just reviews what we just talked about.
Kind of looks like a rose. I don't know. His name is Brad.
Pretty interesting, right? How all that complex. These are social insects, so are ants. They are organized in sort of a society with different jobs and roles and so forth. So pretty interesting there. All right, well, there are other insects, though, also are responsible for pollinating plants.
What do the bees do like the honey once it's in the comb?
They consume it, yeah.
Yeah,
They
if
consume
they're like, oh, out of food today.
Yeah. Butterflies are pollinators. Butterflies have this long, almost kind of like a tongue. Yeah, that's okay. Almost kind of like a tongue that they put into a long part of the stigma of the flower, or the style of the flower. They reach in to get the nectar from it. Flies are generally attracted to rotting flesh, but they are attracted to certain flowers which emit this smell of rotting flesh. Okay? And so they are pollinators in that way. Bats, as we said, pollinate generally at night. So the flowers that are looking to attract bats often have large white flowers that can easily be seen at night. Birds, like hummingbirds, are very common pollinators. They have a good sense of color, so many bird-pollinated flowers will be colorful. They don't have a great sense of smell, so often they don't have a strong odor. And usually the flowers provide a lot of nectar because birds have much higher nutritional requirements than insects. To keep a hummingbird alive, it uses a huge amount of energy for it to fly the way it does, so hummingbirds need a lot of nectar. They often have very specifically shaped beaks that are adapted to getting nectar from a single flower. So, just sort of in summary, animal pollinated flowers, what do you expect from their petals?
They can be bigger.
To be larger, colorful. Wind pollinated flower petals,
Smaller.
usually small. The aroma in animal pollinated flowers,
It's like specific to them.
yeah, and it's usually they do have a scent, whereas wind pollinated flowers typically would not. Nectar, animal pollinated? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes? Wind?
No.
No. Amount of pollen produced? Animal?
A good bit, not a ton.
Relatively small amount. Because again, they don't need a ton of pollen because they know the animal visiting them is going right to another flower. They don't need that to rely on the randomness of large amounts like wind pollinated flowers. They have a lot of pollen. A lot of pollen.
Smell can a flower be
What?
animal, like pollinated by an animal handling?
Usually not. I mean, they can randomly just happen if the wind takes away some of that pollen, but typically they're pollinated by plants. So, what is this?
It's a corn.
That's corn. So, corn plants are interesting. They're flowering plants. Okay, and actually, when you look at, if you were able to strip off the husk of an ear of corn, what you would see, you know, the silk of corn.
Yeah.
Each one of those is actually the style of the pistil. And each kernel would have one of those silks attached to it. Okay? That's an example of a kernel of corn that still has the style attached to it. The pollen is produced, you know, the tassel of a corn plant up at the top, that's where the pollen is released. And then it fertilizes the silks of a plant, and that pollinates and causes the kernels to form.
I feel like bad for
And if you ever get a piece of corn, there's that, at the end often, there's like no kernels there. Those are flowers that were not actually fertilized by, or pollinated by pollen grain, and they don't develop. So fruits will not form. The kernels are the fruits. They won't form unless pollination has happened. So we'll talk about fruit here in a second. So mimicry is interesting to think about in terms of pollination. Some plants have evolved mimicry. We talked about this in evolution to sort of look and even smell like insects. So this is the petals of the flower. These are the petals. And what happens is they look like a female insect, and males think that they are. They go find them, attempt to mate with them. However, they're not female insects. So in the process, the male gets pollen on them and then helps to pollinate the flowers.
Switcheroo.
Yeah.
Happens to the best.
All right, these are really cool videos. They're super time-lapse, high-quality images of pollinators pollinating flowers.
Can you put this away?
I believe so, yeah.